40 years. That's how long it took to solve the murder of a schoolgirl. 40 years, until technology reached a level once considered unattainable. Such methods don't always help solve brutal crimes. Sometimes they only prolong the agony of those who have lost loved ones and are waiting for an answer to a single question: who could do such a thing? Families live with this question for years, for decades. It never lets go. On September 6, 1968, Rochelle Ward was born into a family filled with love and care. Her older sister, Andrea, was always by her side, ready to support and comfort her. The bond between them was strong, the kind that needs no explanation. Andrea remembered her younger sister as the brightest and kindest person she had ever met. The family lived in Red Bluff, a small California town about 200 kilometers north of Sacramento. The place is known for its scorching summers, when thermometers soar past 40 degrees Celsius, and its cool, damp winters when fog hangs over the hills. In 1983, it had about 10,000 residents. Everyone knew everyone, who worked where, whose kids were whose, who was friends with whom. The town's economy was built on ranches and fruit orchards. Agriculture fed the locals, so the modest downtown with a few townhouses was surrounded on all sides by farmland. Endless fields, dirt roads, and scattered houses on the horizon. In 1983, Rochelle was in school and preparing to move up to the high school grades. Everyone knew her as a quiet, sweet girl who adored animals and the elderly. She regularly visited a nursing home, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She played checkers with the residents, talked with them, listened to their stories, and gave them attention that many hadn't received in years. This passion was an important part of Rochelle's life. She dreamed of becoming a professional volunteer. Her goal was simple: to make the world just a little bit better, one girl, one visit at a time. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. March 3, 1983 began like any other day. A gray morning, a drizzling rain. Her older sister had since married and moved to Reno. Rochelle lived with her parents. After waking up, she immediately started getting ready for school, methodically, unhurriedly, as always. She called her sister, chatted for a bit, said goodbye, and told her she was leaving. A normal conversation. Their last conversation. It was drizzling outside, so the girl took an umbrella, an old blue one with a wooden handle, and set off for the Seventh-day Adventist school. It was located a few blocks from her home, a journey that took about 15 minutes at a leisurely pace. Usually, Rochelle walked there with her friend and classmate, Becky Turner. The school was tiny. There were only a few girls in the 8th grade. Everyone had known each other since the 1st grade. Other schools were located nearby. When the children went to their classes, the road was always full of people. It was safer together. As a rule, Rochelle left early to pick up her friend so they could walk together. They liked walking as a pair, chatting along the way, sharing their plans for the day. That morning, acquaintances saw her pass by Becky's house. Rochelle stopped at the porch, waiting for her classmate to come out. She stood there for a minute, maybe two, but she quickly noticed the Turner's car was not in the family driveway. It was usually always there, an old maroon sedan that was visible from a distance. Rochelle knew that her friend's mother taught at their school. Seeing that the car was gone, she concluded that Mrs. Turner was driving the children to school herself because of the rain. Logical, reasonable. So, around 8 in the morning, without waiting for Becky, she simply went to school alone. Under her umbrella, along the wet pavement, past familiar houses, alone. Around 9 in the morning, a farmer who lived 10 kilometers from the edge of town near an interstate highway exit heard a gunshot, a sharp crack that tore through the morning silence. He froze, listening. There were no more sounds, only the wind in the trees and the distant hum of cars on the highway. The man grew concerned. Recently, there had been an increase in senseless livestock killings in the area. Someone was having fun shooting other people's animals, leaving the carcasses to rot in the fields. He was about to call the sheriff. He feared for his own animals, for the cows he had raised for years. But first, he decided to look out the window to check. The animals were standing by the fence, safe and sound, chewing grass as if nothing had happened. And on the road next to his property, a brown car was driving calmly, unhurriedly, smoothly, without any fuss. The farmer peered at the driver through the curtain of rain. The face was unfamiliar, not a local, that was for sure. But he acted relaxed, with no sign of alarm or haste. Hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead. Just an ordinary driver. So the man decided it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone was shooting at cans, at targets, just having fun. And he didn't call anyone. He went back to his chores. The farmer worked on his property all morning. He repaired a fence, checked equipment, the usual routine. Then, around 11:30, he decided to walk the perimeter to check the fencing after the night's rain. He walked along the fence, through the mud and puddles, inspecting the posts and barbed wire. And suddenly, he noticed something strange on the shoulder of the dirt road. Something colorful, unnatural amidst the gray earth and wet grass. As he got closer, he froze. With horror, he realized the motionless figure of a girl was lying on the ground. A small figure in a white blouse and blue jeans. Face down, not moving. Upon closer inspection, it was clear. Her appearance spoke for itself. He called out to her several times, his voice trembling. No reaction, no breath, no signs of life. Her skin was cold, waxy. He then rushed to the house, almost running. His legs tangled, his breath caught in his throat. The man immediately remembered the single gunshot that had sounded a few hours earlier and realized it was that shot that had taken this girl's life. Realizing the teenager was gone, he grabbed the telephone receiver with trembling hands and contacted the police. After noon, officers from the local sheriff's department were already working at the scene. Yellow tape, cameras, measurements. It had begun. Around 3 in the afternoon, Rochelle's mother, Sandy Hawes, returned home. She worked at the nearby highway patrol office, and her shift had ended in the afternoon. Tired, worn out from a typical workday. Upon returning, the first thing the woman did was call for her daughter. Silence. She immediately noticed her younger daughter wasn't home. Strange. Usually by this time she was already home, doing her homework or watching TV. Sandy felt a slight unease, not yet fear, just a sense of worry. She called her older daughter, Andrea. She told her they had spoken in the morning. Everything was normal, as always. They talked, and Rochelle left for school. Nothing else unusual. This seemed strange. She was usually home by this time. Her schedule was clear, predictable. Sandy grew more alarmed, but tried to stay calm. Unfortunately, she couldn't contact her daughter. Mobile phones were not yet common. You couldn't just dial a number and ask, "Where are you?" She decided her younger daughter had simply gotten caught up talking with a friend and lost track of time. It happens. Teenagers. Sandy turned on the television to distract herself and immediately heard a news report in the local bulletin. A teenage girl, showing no signs of life, had been discovered on the outskirts of town that morning. The anchor spoke in a steady, professional voice, but the words cut to the quick. At the time of the report, the victim had not yet been identified. Her identity was being established, with details to follow. The news hit Sandy like an electric shock. Her hands went cold, her breath caught. She grabbed the back of a chair. The unease instantly turned into panic, cold and paralyzing. Sandy tried calling her daughter's friends, her fingers trembling on the rotary dial, but she couldn't reach everyone. Some weren't home, some didn't answer. Each ring seemed to last an eternity. The woman couldn't sit still any longer. She got in her car and drove to Becky Turner's house, speeding, barely noticing the road. There, she found her daughter's friend, who confirmed her worst fears, saying what Sandy had dreaded to hear. Rochelle hadn't been at school that day. She never showed up at all. Sandy felt a chill run down her spine. Her face turned pale, her lips trembled. She turned around without even saying goodbye and drove home. Now the woman wanted only one thing: to contact the sheriff's office and report her younger daughter missing immediately. At that moment, the police were still trying to identify the victim. They worked methodically, by the book. They immediately decided to check if it was Rochelle. The missing person report coincided in time and description. Sandy described her daughter's clothes and appearance in detail, her voice breaking with every word. A white blouse, the very one Rochelle had put on that morning. Blue jeans, her favorite pair, slightly worn at the knees. A blue umbrella. Dark hair, shoulder length. Everything matched the description of the unknown killer's victim found outside of town that day. The woman was asked to come for an identification. It was the most terrible drive of her life. The cold corridor of the morgue, the smell of disinfectant, the white light of the lamps. Thanks to her mother, Rochelle Ward was identified. Sandy nodded, unable to speak, and collapsed into a chair. The girl's murder was a devastating blow to the family. Their world was turned upside down. It shook the entire local community to its core. The residents of Red Bluff were terrified. They didn't know what to expect next, who would be next, where to find safety. The uncertainty and growing media interest spawned a host of rumors. Telephone lines lit up with calls. People locked their doors with every lock they had and didn't let their children go out alone. Some were convinced it was the work of a serial killer who would strike again if the police didn't catch him quickly. The hysteria and fear were fueled by every new statement from officials, which only further alarmed the local population, especially in the schools. Panic reigned there. Parents demanded security, and teachers didn't know what to tell the children. It was believed that the maniac was specifically targeting minors, schoolgirls. While the Ward family mourned their daughter, shut off from the world, detectives continued their investigation. Locals whispered about the fate of the murdered girl on the streets, in stores, at gas stations. Most spoke of a brutal assault. The word was uttered quietly, with glances over their shoulders. But at that time, it was still unknown whether Rochelle had been subjected to such an assault, or if she was simply the victim of spontaneous brutality, a random target. A little later, the sheriff held a press conference. He stood before the microphones, his face weary, and announced some of the investigation's theories. It was revealed that the girl had indeed been brutally assaulted and then killed with a shot to the back of the head. One shot, precise, cold-blooded. However, nothing specific could be said about the perpetrator. No leads, no names. To calm the local community, parents and children, the police began to act decisively. They went to schools, held meetings, and talked about safety rules. They patrolled the neighborhoods in cars and on foot, providing a visible presence. The town was protected, or so it seemed. Despite the measures taken, it took several years for some children to fully recover from the aftermath of this crime. The fear was deeply ingrained. Becky Turner was more shaken by the death of her best friend than anyone. For several weeks, she couldn't sleep properly. She would wake up at night in a cold sweat, having nightmares in which Rochelle was calling to her for help. The girl spoke several times with police officers who came to the school and patiently explained to the children how to keep themselves safe, how not to become a victim. After these briefings, the frightened students of the local school began walking to class only in groups, of 4, of 5, never alone. The girls were the most afraid of moving about by themselves, especially along the same roads Rochelle had walked. And Becky experienced a paralyzing, panicked terror every time she had to walk the route she and Rochelle usually took to school together. Every corner, every turn triggered an attack of fear. She avoided those places. Becky was certain the girl had been abducted right there, on that stretch of road between her house and the school, where they had walked together every day. That same year, 11 Seventh-day Adventist schools organized a memorial event. They gathered with the deceased's parents in the backyard of Rochelle's school. Dozens of people came. Teachers, students, neighbors, simple acquaintances. They planted tulips in memory of Rochelle, bright yellow and red ones, so that every spring they would be a reminder of the girl who loved life. In addition, a memorial plaque with the deceased's name was installed here, a simple bronze one, with her dates of life and the words, "She wanted to make the world better." By this time, law enforcement officers had thoroughly investigated everyone in the murdered girl's circle. They went through every acquaintance, every name in her diary. The detectives found not a single suspect. The girl did not associate with dangerous people, nor did she meet with anyone suspicious. She had no behavioral problems, bad habits, or dark secrets. Rochelle was a well-adjusted teenager with no conflicts with her parents and no reason to run away from home. No quarrels, no secrets. She had no ill-wishers or enemies. Everyone loved this quiet, kind girl. A great deal of evidence was collected from the crime scene. Hairs, fabric fibers, biological traces. Everything was carefully packaged, labeled, and sent for analysis. But it did not lead the detectives to a trail. The technology was primitive, and databases didn't exist. Despite a month of intense work, they hit a dead end. A dead, hopeless end. The situation only changed in the 90s, after almost 10 years of silence, when the first convincing prime suspect emerged, serial killer Henry Lee Lucas. The man came forward himself, confessing to his involvement in Rochelle's murder. At that time, he was already known for several murders for which he was serving time. He was in for life, with no chance of freedom. He had a propensity for brutally assaulting women. It was his signature, his pathology. After hearing Rochelle's story on television, Henry Lucas began to claim that he was the one who had shot the schoolgirl. He had made sensational confessions before, actively communicating with journalists, claiming that he had traveled the highways of the United States for a full 8 years, killing left and right. According to Henry, during this time, the number of his victims exceeded 600, an unimaginable figure that would have made him the most prolific serial killer in American history. However, detectives treated his words with deep skepticism because he had repeatedly tried to take credit for all the famous crimes in the area, wanting to get his share of fame, attention, and notoriety. Lucas reveled in the attention, bathed in it. Officially, he was credited with only 3 confirmed murders. No more could be proven. He had killed his mother in a fit of rage, and then 2 other women. As for the other 600 victims, he was likely lying brazenly, not even bothering with details, just making up stories on the fly that were far from the actual circumstances. The geography didn't line up. The dates were mixed up. The descriptions didn't match. Some of his victims turned out to be fictional or even living people. Nevertheless, verifying his involvement in Rochelle's murder was necessary. Even a ghost of a chance could not be ignored. Henry Lee Lucas had committed murders before and could well have been involved in this case. What if, this time, he was telling the truth? Detectives immediately showed great interest in Henry Lee Lucas's statement, though they understood the risks. The man was brought from prison for questioning. He was behind bars on charges for the previous 3 murders, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He had no way out, nothing to lose. According to Henry's biography, at the time of Rochelle's murder in March 1983, he was indeed living not far from Sacramento, working in construction and renting a room in a motel. Therefore, he could, theoretically, have gotten to Red Bluff quickly, 2 hours by car, no more. Geographically, it all added up. As soon as Henry appeared in the interrogation room and sat across from the detectives, he began to act strangely. He smirked, fidgeted in his chair, and avoided direct eye contact. The man couldn't remember the name of the town where the attack on the girl had occurred. He offered several options, all of them wrong. He stated that the place where he had supposedly left the victim was somewhere around Sacramento, near a river, which also didn't match the truth. She had been found 10 kilometers from Red Bluff in a completely different direction. The interrogation lasted more than 3 hours, with detectives methodically asking questions and recording the answers. During this time, Lucas gave numerous contradictory statements. He named different dates, different places, different circumstances. He would say one thing, and half an hour later, something completely different. He named several geographical locations that had no connection to the victim. He couldn't describe what the girl looked like, what she was wearing, or the color of her hair. The man was never able to credibly describe the details of the attack on the girl, getting tangled in his own fabrications. It became obvious he was simply lying once again, enjoying the attention, playing games with the police. Communicating with Henry Lee Lucas and thoroughly checking his false confessions took up a great deal of the detective's precious time, weeks of work, and required significant police resources. In the end, it was definitively proven. He had simply made another false confession to attract attention, get in the news, and feel important. Therefore, the man was quickly removed from the list of suspects, and no charges were filed against him for Rochelle's murder. Another dead end. During the initial investigation, law enforcement had stored samples of the killer's biological material collected from the crime scene. While in 1983 they were practically useless, DNA analysis technology was only in its infancy, with its first steps being taken in laboratories. Science had since taken great leaps forward. Henry Lucas's DNA profile, obtained from the prison database, was compared with the evidence collected 40 years ago. They did not match. Not a single marker. A complete mismatch. Lucas had no connection to this crime. He subsequently died at the age of 64 in 2001 while incarcerated, having never given truthful testimony about any of his fabricated crimes. To get more information, leads, and witnesses, detectives frequently appealed to the public through the media over all those years. They gave interviews, published articles, and showed photographs. This attracted a great deal of attention from local residents and beyond. Many claimed that on that morning, a mysterious driver in a brown car had been seen in the area of the suburban farmlands where the victim was found. Several suspects emerged, along with names, faces, and rumors. They were thoroughly checked both during the initial investigation and later as technology developed and new methods became available. One of the most valuable sources of information turned out to be the same ranch owner, the farmer who had contacted the police when he discovered the girl on his land. Thanks to his description, a composite sketch of the driver of the brown car was created. An artist worked on it for a long time, refining the details. Unfortunately, it was still general information, a typical appearance, nothing special. A stocky man, long hair, a beard. There were thousands like him. No one noticed the car's license plate. Not a single witness remembered the number. The driver wasn't seen clearly. The rain, the distance, a fleeting glance. With the data collected, the investigation could only conduct standard operational procedures, but these led to no results. After Rochelle walked past her friend's house that rainy morning, she walked a few hundred more meters, apparently in the direction of the school, along her familiar route. A lone girl under a blue umbrella on an empty street attracted unwanted attention. An unknown man in a brown car noticed her, slowed down, and approached her on the stretch of road between Becky's house and the school. Perhaps he was just driving by at first, then turned around. It is presumed that he intimidated her with a firearm, showed a gun, pointed it at her, gave her orders. He forced her to get into the car against her will or grabbed her by force, shoving the terrified teenager into the vehicle. Rochelle most likely tried to resist, to scream, but there was no one around. The rain muffled the sounds. Neither the brown car nor the driver, whom eyewitnesses described as a stocky young man of about 30 with long dark hair and a thick beard, was ever found, despite all efforts. After the victim was discovered, a sufficient amount of evidence was collected at the crime scene that could have been the key to solving the case. Forensic specialists worked for hours. Biological fluids and microscopic skin particles, which are carriers of DNA, were found. In 1983, the technologies that would allow for the effective analysis of such evidence and the extraction of identifying information from it were in their infancy and provided practically no valuable information for the investigation. Fortunately, none of this was lost or deteriorated over time. Everything was carefully collected, packaged in sterile containers, documented with the date and place of collection, and sent to the police archives for long-term storage, in the hope that science would one day advance enough to read these silent testimonies. During the investigation, which stretched on for years, detectives continued to methodically and thoroughly analyze all available information. They checked men who even vaguely matched the description of the composite sketch, stopped suspicious brown cars, and questioned their owners, but all to no avail. Every lead hit a dead end. During this period, many local residents noticed a strange coincidence. Based on the description of the car model and the driver's appearance, the man in the composite sketch bore a strong resemblance to the sheriff who was working in the local department at the time, Ron Koenig. He did indeed have a similar car, a similar build, and a similar beard. Local residents began to suspect him, cautiously at first, and then more loudly, of involvement in the girl's murder. Whispers grew into conversations. The sheriff, upon learning of this, confidently and publicly declared his complete innocence and gave an interview to the local newspaper. But the skeptical residents of Red Bluff were convinced that there would be an attempt to cover for him, to hush up the case, as he was a law enforcement officer, one of their own in the system. In the subsequent years, despite the wealth of evidence collected during the investigation, and despite public pressure, no real proof of Ron's involvement in the murder was ever found. His DNA did not match, and his alibi was checked several times. However, suspicions among a portion of the population smoldered for years, like embers. This seriously undermined the man's authority and the trust placed in him in a town where reputation meant everything. There were even people who began to openly express their dislike for the sheriff, turning away when they met him, whispering behind his back, and accusing him with their eyes. His life became a living hell. Although the case had hit a dead end, it formally remained open through 2000 and beyond. The investigation was never officially closed, only slowed down, taking a back seat. In the period between the 90s and the 2000s, several new prime suspects emerged, with whom the police communicated in detail, conducting interrogations and checks. Each time, new individuals, new names, came into the detective's view. DNA samples were taken from them for comparison. During the investigation period, several detectives who had worked on the case from the very beginning retired, grew old, and grew tired. They were replaced by new, young police officers who, with enthusiasm, re-examined the materials, interrogated all the individuals involved in the case, and reviewed the testimonies. However, this did not help to move things forward. No breakthrough occurred. Each time, new, progressive methods of DNA research appeared, and they appeared regularly, the previously obtained materials were retrieved from the archives and sent for retesting. They searched for matches in the ever-growing databases of registered offenders, but none ever appeared. The database grew, technology improved, but there were no results. Silence. The situation did not change cardinalna for decades, until 2022, 39 long years after the tragedy, when law enforcement agencies began to actively discuss a fundamentally new approach to analyzing old evidence. The detective leading the investigation at that time, a young enthusiast, learned about the use of genetic genealogy, a revolutionary, innovative method that allows a killer to be found not directly, but through his lineage, through his relatives. By this time, law enforcement agencies, genealogy websites, and other public databases had collected millions, even tens of millions, of DNA samples that ordinary residents of the United States of America had voluntarily provided to build their family trees, find relatives, and study their origins. People wanted to know where their ancestors came from, who their distant cousins were. An incredibly extensive database was formed, which could, theoretically, be used for forensic analysis, even if the evidence from the crime scene did not directly match the existing police lists of registered criminals. The method allows for the determination of family connections with high accuracy, including even very distant relatives, third or fourth cousins, people connected through several generations. This principle makes it possible to solve old crimes that had long been gathering a thick layer of dust in the cold case files and seemed hopeless. At the same time, the procedure itself was a rather complex and lengthy process. It required special knowledge and could take weeks or even months of painstaking work by genealogists. But the method had already proven its impressive effectiveness in practice, as by 2023, more than 600 previously unsolved cases across the country had been successfully solved precisely with the help of genetic genealogy. Cold cases were coming back to life. By that time, the technology was already in regular and frequent use by law enforcement agencies to identify the perpetrators of a wide variety of violent crimes, as well as to identify unidentified human remains and nameless victims. In 2022, a new team of experienced detectives was specially formed in the county to systematically tackle the backlog of unsolved crimes and review old cases. Finally, after a long wait, the case of Rochelle Ward, one of the oldest and most painful, fell into their hands. First and foremost, they methodically examined all the preserved evidence that had been stored for decades. It turned out that back in 1983, during the initial examination, a small tuft of hair, just a few strands, had been carefully collected. Judging by the color and texture, it definitely did not belong to her. It was too dark, too coarse. It was considered highly probable that this tuft of hair belonged to the person who committed the crime, left behind as a result of physical contact. Experts believed that if they could obtain a viable DNA sample from this tuft of hair and conduct a detailed analysis using the latest genetic genealogy, they could finally get on the trail of the killer, or at least his family. A preliminary meeting was organized between county representatives, the FBI, and the Department of Justice, which had initially overseen and investigated the deceased schoolgirl's case. After serious discussion, and after weighing all the pros and cons, the final decision was made to use this innovative and costly method. To this end, the county sheriff's office officially contacted a private specialized company called Astrea Forensics, which conducts such investigations. That very lock of hair, which had been stored for 40 years, was carefully transferred to the modern laboratory. First, a complex DNA profiling was performed using the latest equipment. Then, the resulting genetic information was sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for genealogical analysis and a search for matches. This process usually dragged on for long weeks or even months of waiting, but this time, as if fate had decided to speed things up, everything progressed quite quickly, unexpectedly so. The results began to come in. On September 7th, 2023, exactly 40 years after Rochelle's birth, detectives read again with representatives from the Department of Justice and FBI agents in a closed room to review the long-awaited results of the genealogical investigation. The atmosphere was tense. As it turned out, scientists had managed to establish even the name of the probable killer with a high degree of certainty. He turned out to be a former resident of the city of Red Bluff named Johnny Coy. The psychological profile of this man immediately struck the police officers present as very curious and disturbing. First, the man's full biography was urgently checked, and all archives were pulled. He did indeed have a serious criminal history directly linked to violent crimes against women. It was discovered that the man was a dangerous repeat offender whose signature was suspiciously and frighteningly similar to the known circumstances of Rochelle Ward's abuse and murder. The same brutality, the same method, the same coldness. Despite this obvious similarity, for some reason, he had never once been considered or treated as a suspect in this particular case. His name simply never came up. It turned out that even back in 1983, when Rochelle was killed, a young Johnny Coy was already well known to local police as a petty criminal and a constant offender. He repeatedly committed petty thefts, disorderly conduct, and fights, and appeared in police reports. He also systematically and openly used heavy illicit substances, was on record, and was infamous among neighbors and police officers as a very aggressive, hot-tempered, and completely unpredictable person, capable of fits of rage. 6 long years after the schoolgirl's murder, in 1989, Johnny committed another serious crime. He stopped a car in which a middle-aged woman and her 20-year-old daughter were traveling. They were calmly driving along a familiar road and recognized his face, as he still lived in that small town where everyone knew each other. As soon as the women stopped, recognizing him as an acquaintance, he suddenly began to aggressively threaten them with a pistol, waving it in their faces. Johnny crudely forced them to immediately drive far away from the city, following their car in his own. On a deserted, desolate road where there was no one for many miles, the man, continuing to threaten them with the firearm and hold them in fear, brutally assaulted the 21-year-old woman, stole all her personal belongings, money, and documents, and also carjacked their vehicle, leaving the victims without a means of transportation. Fortunately, this time, he did not take his victims' lives, but simply cynically left them on the roadside in shock and drove off in the stolen car. When the traumatized victims managed to reach the nearest house several hours later, received help, and filed a report with law enforcement, Johnny Coy was identified from the description and arrested fairly quickly. He was still armed with the same pistol and driving the stolen car, but during the arrest, strangely enough, he did not offer serious resistance and surrendered calmly. In addition to the stolen car and the victim's belongings, a search revealed several bags of potent, dangerous, illicit substances in large quantities. According to court records, he was officially convicted of this serious crime and sentenced by the court to a very long prison term, practically life without the possibility of parole. Now, decades later, detectives were very eager to speak with Johnny Coy in person, to conduct a detailed interrogation with him, to try to obtain a full confession to Rochelle's murder, hear the details, and finally close the case. However, a sad fact came to light. He had passed away in June 2019 from natural causes, never facing potential justice in the girl's case, taking his secrets with him. Nevertheless, the investigation still needed to find irrefutable proof to definitively confirm that he was indeed involved in what happened to the teenager 40 years ago. It was necessary to urgently find his living relatives, collect fresh DNA samples from them for comparative analysis, and definitively verify the kinship. Fortunately, members of the extensive Coy family were located and found without much difficulty. They still live in the same area and had never moved away. In fact, several different people with direct or indirect family ties to Johnny were found and identified, and detectives described the situation to all of them in detail and honestly, asking for their help. Despite the serious risk of public condemnation and shame, all the relatives, without exception, voluntarily and consciously agreed to provide their DNA samples for a thorough comparison with the old evidence collected back in 1983. In return, the investigation promised not to disclose their identities publicly and to protect them from harassment. DNA matching through relatives in this particular case, of course, cannot be a 100% match like a direct comparison, so it was a great stroke of luck and a gift from fate to be able to collect several different samples from different people and obtain the results of several independent cross-analyses. This significantly increased the overall probability of the operation's success and the final accuracy of the genetic work. Each time the collected DNA profiles of the relatives were carefully checked and analyzed, they consistently showed clear, direct matches with the biological material belonging to Johnny Coy's family. The math didn't lie. His appearance, reconstructed from old photographs, completely matched the description provided by the farmer witness who saw the killer that morning. In those years, in the early 80s, Johnny Coy did indeed have a personal brown car of the same model. Everything fit together like a puzzle. It now remained completely unclear to the investigation why a standard check of official state offender databases had not yielded this critical match much earlier, perhaps even decades ago, since Johnny Coy had long been in state prison for his 1989 crime, and his full genetic profile should theoretically have been in the centralized database. At the detective's request, the Department of Justice even organized a special internal investigation and an official review of this crucial issue to understand where the failure occurred. An unfortunate circumstance was discovered. Johnny Coy's DNA sample had indeed been collected much earlier, back in the 90s, when genetic analysis methods were just being developed by scientists and were extremely primitive. Due to this technical limitation, Outdated, incomplete genetic markers of an old type were initially uploaded into the federal CODIS system, which the FBI actively used to search for matches across the country. They were used for only a very limited, short period of time when the database itself was just being formed and standards had not yet been established. Later, from 2020 onward, these old markers were simply not updated automatically and remained in an archival format incompatible with new systems. Several full decades had passed since the tragic events. Now, after all the checks and rechecks, there was absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind about Johnny Coy's direct involvement in the brutal murder of the innocent teenage girl. Specialists decided to re-examine the killer's old genetic profile, which had long ago been uploaded to the database in an outdated format, and meticulously compare it with the modern markers recently obtained from that very lock of hair. A thorough reanalysis using the latest technology unequivocally showed a 100% match. On October 3, 2023, 40 years and 7 months later, the official investigation was ceremoniously completed and closed. According to all expert conclusions, if Johnny Coy had been alive at the time of the final DNA analysis, the collected physical evidence would have been more than enough to unequivocally prove his direct guilt in the abuse and cold-blooded murder of Rochelle Ward, and to guarantee a guilty verdict against him in any court in the country. Even with the best, most expensive lawyers, his chance of avoiding a harsh punishment would have been absolutely negligible. 0. The success of the long investigation into the cold case of Rochelle Ward's murder, despite the enormous amount of time that had passed, had a colossal impact on virtually everyone who had suffered at the hands of Johnny Coy over the years of his criminal activity. Firstly, all suspicions and accusations against the innocent Sheriff Ron Koenig were finally and officially cleared publicly. This was a real relief and liberation for his elderly family, who had lived under the weight of suspicion for years. Although the man himself had long since passed away from natural causes back in 2009, his good name and reputation were now finally and irrevocably cleared of any unjust suspicions and slander in the eyes of the entire community. Secondly, Rochelle's long-suffering relatives also finally received long-awaited psychological relief and partial closure, as they now knew for certain who was directly involved in the brutal murder of their beloved daughter and sister. Despite this important discovery of the truth, the victim's family admitted that they were not, however, completely and fully satisfied with the outcome. For all those endless years, they had sincerely wanted and dreamed for the killer to personally stand before a just court, look them in the eye, and receive the harsh punishment he deserved for his actions. Moreover, they were now fated never to learn all the agonizing details of those terrible events that morning, all the specifics and motives that Johnny Coy took to his grave forever, unrepentant. Still, the case was formally solved and officially closed. Only the final investigative formalities and paperwork remained. Her older sister, Andrea, who had grown older and gray over the years, gave several interviews to persistent journalists after the results were announced. With restrained sorrow in her voice, she said that she had always been very close with her younger sister Rochelle. They were inseparable. At the time of her sister's tragic death, Andrea, as it turned out, was already pregnant but didn't even know or suspect her condition yet. And Rochelle, as her sister recalled, had always shown a huge, sincere interest in the exciting topic of motherhood and children. Andrea had recently married the man she loved and moved to Reno, starting a new life. Her younger sister constantly, during every phone call, would ask her excitedly if she was pregnant yet, when the baby would arrive. Rochelle so badly wanted and dreamed for her beloved sister to have a baby girl soon, a niece she could care for. Andrea still grieved deeply and could not forgive fate that Rochelle tragically did not live to see the happy moment just a few months later when her niece was safely born, a healthy baby girl whom her parents lovingly named in honor of her late sister, also Rochelle, so the name would live on. Because her younger sister was, for Andrea, the kindest, purest, and brightest person in the whole wide world, a rare soul. Now, 40 years later, Andrea frankly and honestly told journalists that she was experiencing very complex, contradictory, mixed feelings about everything that had happened. On the one hand, after 40 incredibly long and agonizing years of waiting, she finally knew the name and face of the person guilty of her beloved younger sister's terrible murder. On the other hand, she still wished, dreamed of looking this killer straight in the eye, of meeting him face to face and telling him in detail what incredibly difficult, devastating trials and suffering he had mercilessly subjected all those people who sincerely loved Rochelle and were close to his innocent victim. But she would never have that chance. The detectives working on the case, however, were primarily professionally interested in more down-to-earth, practical matters and questions. Specifically, the serious question of whether Johnny Coy could theoretically have been responsible for and involved in other similar unsolved violent crimes against women committed in the region during the long period between Rochelle's murder in 1983 and his arrest after the attack on the woman and her daughter in 1989. In the full 6 years of freedom between these two known crimes, he could theoretically have committed many other horrific, terrible deeds that remain unsolved to this day. However, only additional, thorough forensic examination and DNA comparison with other unsolved cases from that period can truly confirm or refute this disturbing hypothesis. But to date, unfortunately, no new data, leads, or matches regarding Johnny Coy's DNA profile have yet entered the database. For now, there is silence, but the search continues.